Look carefully at this building. The arches, the decoration, the courtyard, the way water, stone, and architecture seem to belong to the same world. You might think we are somewhere near Granada, but we are not in Spain. We are deep inside Algeria, in the Aurès Mountains. And this mosque in Tkout appears in the historical record during the 16th century, the same century in which the last Muslims of Spain were being converted, persecuted, and eventually expelled. Is that resemblance simply coincidence? Perhaps. Architecture alone cannot prove where the people who built a building came from. But once we begin following the people, the buildings, the water, and even the words they left behind, a much stranger picture begins to emerge. Because perhaps Al-Andalus did not simply disappear. Perhaps parts of it crossed the sea. To understand where Al-Andalus went, we first have to remember where it began. In the year 711, an army crossed this narrow stretch of water from North Africa into Europe. Its commander was Tariq ibn Ziyad, and the force under him was not simply an army of Arabs arriving directly from Arabia. Historical studies describe Tariq's expedition as mainly Berber, or Amazigh, from North Africa. Even the name Gibraltar preserves the memory of that crossing. Jabal Tariq, the mountain of Tariq. What followed would eventually become Al-Andalus. And already, the usual story begins to look too simple, because Al-Andalus was never just an Arab colony populated by one people. Over centuries it contained Arabs, Amazigh, local Iberians who converted to Islam, Christians, Jews, people of mixed ancestry, and families whose identities changed across generations. Historians describe continual conversion, intermarriage, cultural interaction, and changing boundaries between communities. Al-Andalus was not a race. It was a civilization. And that distinction becomes crucial when that civilization begins to collapse. January 1492. Granada falls. It is one of the most famous dates in Spanish history, and it is often treated as the moment Al-Andalus ended. But people do not disappear when a kingdom disappears. That same year, Spain ordered its openly Jewish population to convert or leave. Many chose exile. Others accepted baptism. Some converts later continued elements of Jewish practice secretly, although historians caution that the experiences of these conversos were extremely varied. The Muslim population remained longer. Many were eventually forced into Christianity. They became known as Moriscos. For generations, some lived outwardly as Christians while preserving parts of Islam privately. Then came the final blow. Between 1609 and 1614, approximately 300,000 Moriscos were expelled from Spain. Most eventually settled in North Africa. So the last great movement out of Al-Andalus did not happen in 1492. It happened more than a century later. And now, we follow them. Across the water, the refugees did not enter an empty land. They entered societies already connected to Al-Andalus by centuries of trade, migration, scholarship, and family ties. But their arrival changed cities. In Morocco, the evidence is extraordinary. UNESCO states that after the Christian reconquest, Tétouan was rebuilt by Andalusian refugees expelled from Spain, and that their influence remains visible in its architecture and art today. Then travel east, into Algeria. Researchers studying the historic architecture of Cherchell described the city as having been rebuilt by refugees from Andalusia at the end of the 15th century. They did not arrive carrying only memories. They brought architectural language, craft skills, and construction knowledge. Later, the Ottoman world would provide another political layer over these cities. So what emerged was neither purely Spanish, nor purely Ottoman, nor purely North African. It was something created from all of them. And there was another thing traveling between these worlds, something even harder to erase: water. Listen to one Spanish word: acequia. In Spain, it means an irrigation channel. But the word is not originally Spanish. It comes from Arabic, al-saqia, a saqia, the channel that carries water. Across Al-Andalus, carefully managed channels carried water into gardens, orchards, and fields. But again, the direction of influence was not simply Spain to Africa. North Africa possessed its own ancient traditions of water engineering. In Morocco, networks of Qattara carried groundwater across dry landscapes. In Algeria, related underground systems are known as fogara. These technologies belong to a much larger history, stretching across the Islamic and Mediterranean worlds. So we should not claim that expelled Andalusians invented irrigation in North Africa. They did not. The mystery is more interesting. People on both sides of this sea shared ideas, improved them, carried them, and passed them between generations. Even today, the Spanish landscape still contains a word that remembers Arabic: acequia. And in the Aurès, traditional channels still carry water through old settlements and orchards. Which brings us back to Tkout. In the old settlement of Tkout stands the mosque associated with Sidi Abd al-Salam ibn Mashish. Local historical reporting dates its construction to between approximately 1535 and 1570. That is an extraordinary period. Granada had already fallen. The Spanish Inquisition was active. Muslims and Jews had been forced into conversion or exile, and refugees were crossing into the Maghreb. One local tradition even connects the figure associated with the Tkout shrine to migration from the Western Maghreb during Spanish Catholic expansion. But here we have to be careful. The surviving traditions are complicated, and this is not proof that Andalusian refugees designed this mosque. Nor should this later Tkout figure be confused automatically with the famous 13th century Moroccan saint of the same name. But look at the building, look at the timing, look at the wider movement of people occurring around it. Could craftsmen or architectural traditions carried through Morocco have reached the Aurès? Could the resemblance simply reflect the larger Maghrebi Andalusian architectural tradition? We do not yet know, and sometimes not knowing is the most interesting part of history. But buildings and water channels are not the only things that survived. There is another part of North African history that has almost disappeared from popular memory: its Jewish past. Jewish communities existed across North Africa for more than 2,000 years, long before the Arab conquests, long before the fall of Granada. Then persecution in Iberia sent new waves across the Mediterranean. Jews fleeing Spain arrived in Morocco and Algeria, but they did not arrive among strangers. They found Jewish communities that had already existed there for centuries. And then something fascinating happened. The old North African communities and the newcomers from Iberia began to overlap. Families mixed, languages changed, names changed. Some converted, some concealed identities during periods of persecution. Others were gradually absorbed into completely different communities. And after enough generations, a family's original story could simply disappear. Today, people across North Africa sometimes take DNA tests and discover ancestry they never expected. Sephardic, Jewish, North African, Southern European, even traces associated with populations much farther east. But DNA cannot tell us whether an ancestor prayed in a synagogue, a mosque, or nowhere at all. What it can do is remind us that the clean identities we use today did not always exist. Arab, Amazigh, Jewish, Andalusian. History constantly crossed those boundaries. And perhaps the strangest possibility is this. Some people may carry the ancestry of communities whose existence their own families no longer remember. Not because someone necessarily erased a secret from a book, but because centuries of conversion, migration, marriage, and assimilation can erase a story without erasing the descendants. So when hundreds of thousands crossed south after the destruction of Al-Andalus, what exactly became of them? Perhaps some remained identifiable as Andalusians. Some remained Jewish. Some became part of Morocco. Some became part of Algeria. And some eventually became something else entirely. Their descendants may still be there. Only the name of the story was forgotten.